This is Common Criminal Podcast. I'm your host, Vince Polson. Today we have Arthur Brill on as a guest. Arthur, say hi to the folks.
Hi, folks. Thanks, Vince, for having me here.
Yeah, and so Arthur, I met you through it was the what was it, the Ashland Arts Facebook group.
Yes,
Is that right?
it is. It's the Ashland Arts Alliance Facebook group.
Gotcha. Yeah, and I saw there you feature a lot of local artists that gives local Hanover County and Richmond area artists the opportunity to, share some of their work with each other or maybe events, things like that.
Well, yeah. So, first of all, it's Ashland, Virginia. There's a few Ashlands, of course, around the country.
Oh, yeah.
And my wife and I moved to Ashland in 1994 from Charlotte, North Carolina. And in 2000, we moved out of town, but we're only about 15 minutes outside. And so my wife has had a business in Ashland since 1994. She's a piano teacher. So she's got her own piano studio. It's Piano Works Studios. And she also teaches piano at Randolph Macon College, and she accompanies their concert choir on piano.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and so in the year 2012, so we had been living outside of Ashland for about 12 years. There was a lot of press that I was reading about the town of Ashland creating an arts and cultural district. Um, and I met with the town planning director, the president of the Ashland Main Street Association, Tom Wolf, who was pushing for this at the time, and a few other people. And I had a serious discussion with my wife about it. I said, look, um, is this something that you think I should get involved with? Because it's not going to be a dipping my toe in the water kind of a thing. Um, I've been working in the arts for 30 years. I've got a background in film, theater, visual art, performing arts. I'm a sculptor. Um, and So, as it turned out, we both decided that sure, let's see what this is all about, and see what we can do. And so, I created the Ashland Arts Alliance in 2012. It started out as a meetup group, and then migrated to Facebook. And the idea behind it is since Ashland isn't big enough to have, let's say, a group. The population of Ashland is only 7,000 people. So it's not really a big enough area to have a group just for, let's say, photographers or sculptors or painters or whatever. So I thought, well, let's create this Ashland Arts Alliance as sort of a bat signal for people to find each other, and that way we can foster collaboration, mentorship, that type of things, promotion. So really, it's for anybody, not just within the town limits of Ashland, but really anywhere in the surrounding area. Where if Ashland is your kind of go-to place to do your shopping, your living kind of stuff, then consider it your home. And for instance, I live just past the Ashland Berry Farm. I'm literally 10 miles from downtown Ashland, yet that is my closest grocery store.
Wow. In the Ashland Berry Farm, I actually used to go there as a kid because they do the haunted they
Yeah.
do the
Yep.
haunted trail every year. Yeah, so I've gone to that every year since I was a kid, and I think probably most of the people I know in Richmond, if they know anything about Ashland other than Center of the Universe Brewery, then they definitely know about the Ashland Berry Farms. It's either one or
Well,
one of those two
I don't know
things.
if you went
Uh,
there in the year 2003, but it was sort of a perfect storm of opportunity for me. I know the owners of the farm, Ken and Lynn, and I approached Ken and I said, "Hey, would you be interested in a partnership? So if you give me an empty barn, I'll come in, build a haunt, bring in all the actors, and we can do a ticket split." And I actually partnered with the Virginia Renaissance Fair because they had just lost their permanent home. So they had
ah,
actors who didn't have a place to do anything. I design and build. I had some friends who were interested in investing in something, and so I did a haunt. It was called Grimwood, and it was sort of this gothic haunted house, very different from what the Barry Farm normally does. But it was this
Oh,
storyline driven gothic haunted house where the guests, the visitors were there. I like creating storylines that bring the visitors into the story. So the idea is that they were descendants of people who lived in the town of Grimwood, and they were invited there to by
okay.
Professor Grimm to have this sort of celebration kind of event. And as they got there, they realized that the first character they meet is Professor Grimm's psychiatrist, and she tells them that he's crazy, but to go along and humor him because because he thinks all this stuff is real.
Gotcha. Gotcha. That's actually pretty cool. I never thought about, the theater connection there, that everybody who works in a haunted house is that an actor in some sort of capacity. So that makes sense that you would be properly connected to do both the art and display side, but as well be able to find the actors to fill the roles, as it were.
Well,
And that's something you still do a little bit of now, right?
well, it is. I mean, I've always, I got into performing in sort of a backdoor kind of way. I was doing special effects and creating costumes. And I was like, oh, sure, I'll wear the costume, if you don't have somebody to wear it. So I made this big costume out of PVC pipe and foam rubber. It was actually literally the deficit. It was the deficit monster, like the federal deficit, and it was almost like a giant plant kind of creature, like a Little Shop of Horrors. And so you couldn't see the performer inside at all. And so I designed the costume, and then the guy was like, "Oh, do you want to wear it?" And I was like, "Sure." And then I was working on a theatrical production of Frankenstein in Concord, North Carolina, and I had done the makeup for it. I did a live cast of the actor and designed the prosthetic makeup appliance for him. And with like only 2 weekends left to go in the show, the actor wound up actually getting fired for bringing a real knife on stage without.
Whoa.
Like, yeah, so the director calls me up and says, "Hey, I had to fire the, uh, the 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 actor. Can you make me up as the monster?" And I said, "Mike, I can, but I've been to every single rehearsal, and I probably know the script, pretty well. I'd be willing to do it." And so we had some extra rehearsals where the other actors came in and worked with me, and I did the last two weekend performances of the show.
Wow. That's pretty cool. Last minute. What do they call that? They call that the not the sub, but the understudy. There we go.
Understudy, yeah, yeah.
I know a
So
couple things about theater.
right, exactly. So
That's
anyway,
funny.
it was fun. But the funniest thing was, if you're familiar with it's actually in the movie The Bride of Frankenstein, but they did a spoof of it in Young Frankenstein with Gene Hackman playing the
Mhm.
blind man. But basically, there's a scene where the monster is sitting with this blind man, and the blind man's not afraid of him because he doesn't realize he's ugly, right? He's like,
Right.
he's just being friendly to him, and they're smoking a cigar and stuff. But in the play, there was this bowl of oatmeal, and I'm like eating it with my fingers. I'm just like scooping it up, and and
Right.
and then when it's empty, I hold it out to the guy, and I was supposed to say more, but I didn't remember my line, and I'm holding the bowl out to him, and he's being completely in character, pretending he's blind, so he's not reacting to what I'm doing, and I didn't know what to do. And it was almost this like really like little authentic moment where I'm trying to get him to
Not knowing how to
eh,
interact with a blind man.
yeah, and so I
Yeah.
finally nudged him with my shoulder, and he went, "You want more?" And I went, "More."
Oh, that's so funny. That's the kind of things that you find in theater. I think it goes really underappreciated, seeing like a real quality actor, especially doing their job live. because like when you watch a movie, obviously they get 100 takes, so they do everything, as best as they can. But seeing that genuine reaction from I mean, you either, I guess serendipitously, not, as your character, you don't realize he's blind. So then it makes sense, he really has to commit to the being blind for that
Oh,
role. I think
exactly, exactly. And so here we
yeah,
both are on stage being our characters and having a real like problem solving kind of thing. One of the most
right.
beautiful things I've ever seen. I designed the sets for a production of Willy Wonka for Christian Youth Theater in Richmond. I
Oh, the young Frankenstein
Yeah,
connection there.
I think now their character works, but it was Christian Youth Theater at the time, and it was Willy Wonka, and it was being performed at the Stewart School, and there was a storm, and they lost power during the performance, and it was right in the middle of a scene with the kid who's probably like 10 or 12 years old, playing Max TV, and he got up there and sang his entire part a cappella, and it was just amazing, and he got a standing ovation. Like he didn't
Wow,
let the
that
power outage, and that was completely on him. I mean, nobody coached him and stuff. It was just like in the middle of production, bam, it just goes down, and he just gets out there and just belts out his song, and it was just beautiful.
that's actually really cool, and another moment you only get, especially from like live performance and generally smaller productions. When I was a kid, my parents used to they used to take me and my sister up to Richmond. We would and I mean we were probably only like 6 or 7 years old at the time, but we would usually go to either Penny Lane Pub or I think it was Comfort. I'm pretty sure Comfort was there at the time, or it might have been whatever was there before. But then we'd go over to Theater 4 and we would see productions
Hmm.
over there pretty often. Are you familiar with Theater 4? Were you in Richmond at the time when
Yeah,
they were
yep.
doing those?
I was,
Yeah. I don't know. I was really young.
yeah,
It's just
yeah,
one of those things I don't know. Weirdly enough, those are
yeah.
some pretty fond memories. I think I remember seeing the
Cool,
Glass
cool.
Menagerie
Yeah,
there
I actually
once.
don't get out to see
Yeah.
as much live theater as I would like to, um, but I've seen plenty of it as working on shows. I was the technical director for Ashland's summer opera company one summer, and they did Don Giovanni, Deflator Mouse, and then they always have to do something like kind of for the locals. So they did Oklahoma, that was in their summer opera repertoire. So they do like two operas and then an American musical, basically. And then one summer I was the shop foreman, the prop shop foreman for the Contemporary American Theater Festival in Shepherdstown, West Virginia. And they do all brand new first time shows, which is really interesting because usually when you are doing a production, you have something to look at for reference. Like Willy Wonka, like has a look, right? Or a show like
Right.
Cats has a look. But when you are working on a production that has never been produced before, right? So you're like the playwright is there, and you've got you've got the pages in front of you, and you are creating a imagery for this show. You're literally working from a blank slate. It's like, well, what should this look like?
Yeah, and I think that's where the real artistic challenges come in. That or taking on an existing role and making it something totally different. As long as we're in the Willy Wonka vein, you take what was it,
Right.
Johnny Depp's portrayal of the character of kind
Mhm.
of a little darker, a little weirder, and there's a certain level of art to that, and obviously he's like a master craftsman. But then, but looking at something completely brand new and trying to find the best way to bring it to life and to get people to immerse themselves in it. I think that's pretty, it definitely takes a certain level of skill, I think goes
Right,
largely
right, from all
unappreciated.
perspectives. So yeah, so you've got the actor perspective. I mean, look at what Gene Wilder did with Willy Wonka, and like the sheer genius to make this guy, slightly psychotic.
Yeah, and almost sociopathic in a lot of ways.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. And then what is the costuming looked like, and even the setting. So Willy Wonka was actually shot. I was reading about this when I was doing research for my show. It was actually shot in a village in Germany, um, and so it had sort of this
Hmm.
this realism to it because it was a real place, but yet alien to American audiences. So it wasn't a matter of creating a completely fictional. But when I did Willy Wonka, I actually used Richmond as my setting. So Charlie Bucket actually lived in, it was like a Richmond row house, and the factory I modeled after the Lucky Strike building. So even had the tall chimney and everything, and
Right. Now that old they have the old Richmond Braves Indian on top of the Lucky Strike factory now.
they do. Connecticut, yes, yes, and
I lived at the top of the hill in Churchill, that little park right
uh-huh.
there that has the big tall monument. I have no idea who's on top of it though. It might be Stonewall Jackson. But yeah, I used to sit in that park all the time looking over the Lucky Strike building right there. And that has to be hands down my favorite spot in Richmond. I was gonna guess that you used the Sours factory as the destination,
Right.
though I imagine it'd be hard to shoot
Uh-huh.
there, what with all the cars and everything.
Well, I mean, we didn't use it as a destination, but I just used photographs of the building as my inspiration for designing the set.
Gotcha, gotcha. No, I think that that's really awesome, and I've always, I've wished that I would have put more time into like art and stuff like that when I was in high school, so that way I could have used that more as my trajectory. Now I find I'm a lot more left brained than I initially realized. Uh, but no, I love like set design and lights, and I used to do lights and sound in high school when like the auditorium and everything. So
Uh, where did
oh, I went to
where did you go?
West Point High School. It's like near Williamsburg.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so I grew up in that area, and they built this really nice auditorium with like at the time it was like state of the art like lights and sound equipment. And so then they let the very small group of students practice and learn on all that stuff. And I pretty much completely let that go to waste because I didn't do anything with it for like 6 or 7 years after I graduated.
Sure,
Uh,
sure.
but it does actually make me kind of wonder. A question I really wanted to ask you on the show is for young people, because obviously Richmond has a lot of art students at VCU. What do you think is the best way to go as far as like pursuing art as a career? I feel like a lot of my friends that were art students kind of get lost in the shuffle. They feel like they don't know how to monetize this education that they've paid for. What do you think is the best trajectory on being able to be like a career artist?
Hey, I totally feel you, and I've made that not in a derogatory manner, but I like, hey, Richmond is full of art school graduates that are working
At
you know
restaurants?
at
Yeah,
restaurants. Exactly,
yeah,
exactly. It's amazing, so much talent, and I am glad. The number of mural artists in Richmond is pretty staggering, that are actually working artists. And I guess I attribute that to when they did the big push for the murals in Richmond. I was a little bit disappointed at the time that they weren't using local artists. There was really, it's like an international thing. But I
yeah. They
think
were bringing in like this Swedish guy, wasn't it?
yeah, there were a lot of different artists that came in, but I think that changed the mindset and sort of art, and so murals became like oh, hey, let's do this. In fact, Noah Scalin, who's a Richmond artist that I've worked with, he just did a mural on the side of the Broadberry that is also going to be the poster for the Richmond Folk Festival.
Oh wow,
So,
that's awesome.
yeah, yeah. So I was saying, pretty cool stuff. But to answer your question, my own path has been really, really meandering. Um, and I started out as a draftsman. My dad was an engineer. He taught me how to draft when I was like 11 years old. So when I got out of high school, I really didn't know what I wanted to do. I wound up taking a couple of years off, and then I went to college. I was actually a theology major of all things. Um, And when I got out of school, I did what was easiest, which was I took a drafting job and did both mechanical and architectural drafting for about 8 years. And I segued that into designing sets for, started with theater and then film. Um, but I'll tell you what would happen is whenever I found somebody doing something that I thought was interesting, I would ask them if I could watch them work. Whether it was, I had a friend making low budget horror films, and he kind of introduced me to um, mold making and casting because he was doing his own special effects. And then I had a friend who had a friend who was a sculptor in Richmond doing bronze statuary, like let's say like well, you mentioned Connecticut, the Indian on top of the Lucky Strike
Hmm.
building. Well, Paul DiPasquale is the sculptor in Richmond who did that. He also did the Neptune statue at Virginia Beach and the Arthur Ashe statue on Monument. Um,
Oh, okay. Which, well, now sits on the corner of Monument and
well,
Arthur Ashe
yes, they
Boulevard.
changed it to Arthur Ashe Boulevard exactly, but yeah, so he
Right. Largely, I think because of the presence of that statue and the Arthur Ashe building, which
correct.
is far less notorious than the
Correct,
statue.
correct. But in any case, this is my friend. Well, I became friends with him. His name was Graham Weathers, and he was doing that kind of work in Charlotte. And he was working out of his basement. He would sculpt down there and make his molds and casts. And I was like, "Man, can I come over and just walk, look at your stuff? I would just want to look at your molds. I want to see how you make them." And he was super gracious, and he explained, the process of mold making to me. And one day I'm at work on my little drafting board in a little 8 by 10 cubicle at a job I'd had for about 4 years. Now it's pretty darn miserable doing it. And one day I get a phone call, and it's from a small theater company outside of Charlotte. It was the Little Theater of Gastonia, and they are doing a production of the play Foxfire. Now, this was actually done on television. It starred Hume Cronin and Jessica Tandy, and John Denver played their son. And anyway, this is a small local community theater production of that story. And there's a scene in the play where the wife, who in the movie was played by Jessica Tandy, she's this older woman and she's living by herself on a farm. Her husband's passed away, and her son is coming home for Thanksgiving, and she wants to prepare a Thanksgiving meal. And the next door neighbor has killed a hog and given her the head to make souse meat, which you make out of pig head. So she's preparing this on stage, and this guy comes to her, and he's supposed to be from the city, like from Greenville, South Carolina, or something like that. And he wants to sweet talk her into selling her farm to turn into a resort. So he's trying to impress her. But as he comes and sees her working up, he's repulsed by the fact that she's got, like, a pig head there, and she's, cutting up. And she says, "Oh, you mind giving me a hand with this with the eyeballs? I'm not as strong as I used to be, but be careful, that black skirt stuff will squirt all over you." And so my task was to build a prop pig head where the eyeballs could not only be cut out, but then this black stuff would squirt out and hit the guy
Oh,
and
gross.
squirt off him. And the more they described this to me, I was like, "Oh my god, this is amazing! This sounds like absolutely fascinating. This is so cool." So they had gotten my name from Graham, the sculptor who invited me to his basement. I think he was a board member for the theater. But when they said, "Hey, we need somebody who can make this," he said, "Oh, I know just the guy." So I called up Graham and, like, "Graham, this is awesome, but I need some help. How do I need some little bit of guidance." And then I had two friends working in the special effects movie industry. And what I wound up doing was actually going and getting a real pig head. I had to go find a market outside of Charlotte that, sold, you could get your, what do they call that stuff? Is it Scrapple or something like that?
Oh, yeah, yeah,
Pigs,
the pig
yeah,
guts.
pig's feet, all the sorts of stuff. But actually, they actually
Yeah.
sold like whole heads because people did that. They made, this souse meat out of pig head. So anyway, I buy the pig head, and I wind up doing a cast of it, making a mold, and then casting copies of it. Actually, wound up using gelatin. It's kind of a really meandering story, but I knew somebody who had taken the Dick Smith special effects makeup course. Dick Smith did the makeup for The Exorcist and Planet of the Apes. And when he retired, he did this like correspondence makeup course. It was before the internet. You actually paid him like $1,500, and he would send you all of his books, which were like handwritten notes and stuff, and suppliers, where to buy things and stuff. And you would like take photographs of your work and mail them back to him, and he would critique your work. So anyway, there was this recipe in there for making skin, for lack of a better word, out of gelatin. So like Jello, right? And
Huh.
now you can buy the stuff from special effects makeup houses. You can buy all the materials. It's like 300 bloom gelatin and sorbitol and glycerin, and you get this recipe. When you mix it together, it makes this rubber that won't dry out, and you can melt it and pour it into molds. It stinks to high heaven, but when it solidifies, so you can make makeup appliances with it. I made the actual whole pig head out of it. I cast about a half-inch layer of this stuff into my mold, and then put wax in inside of that to give it a hard form. So it was hollow, but it was like a wax skull almost with this skin over it, and it was about a half-inch thick, and you could like put your finger into it, and it would like compress a little bit. And so during rehearsals of the play, I made one for each night because they were literally cutting this thing up, and I made one for
Right.
rehearsal. Now they had been rehearsing with a stand-in of a motorcycle helmet just to represent the prop, to carry around and stuff.
Yeah,
And
roughly the
so
same size, yeah.
yeah, so on that particular night when I brought the actual prop, I replaced the motorcycle helmet with this prop, and one of the actors came in after I had gotten there, and she had to handle this thing, and she went, "Oh my God, nobody told me we were using a real pig head."
That's a great compliment. That's a
It
really
was.
great
It was.
compliment.
It was awesome. And so what I did. So we'll get into a little bit of gory detail here. When I got the pig head, the eyes had already been removed, so there were eye sockets, right?
Mhm.
So what I did is I cast these little half eyeballs. I actually used like a ping pong ball, cut it in half, put a little bit of gelatin in there, and microwaved it, and it made a nice little half eyeball. So I had the pig head on its side, and I poured some fake blood down into the eye socket. I put the eyeball on top of it, and then just brushed some melted gelatin around it to glue it in place. So that way you could take your knife, cut the
And
eye
cut
out,
it out.
and it would actually bleed, right?
Right.
So the audience, so this is like my first like major like real theater prop. So I'm sitting in the audience, right? And the pig head is out on stage, and everybody's like going, ew. And then she cuts the eye out and it's bleeding. And everybody's like, ew. And I am just like in my bliss going, oh my God, I am freaking out an entire room of people. Well, then there was the part where the black stuff had to squirt out. And what I used was a small baby's ear syringe, a little blue,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, okay.
And I hooked a piece of aquarium tubing up to that, and I had it up inside the head because the head was hollow, and had it come through the head, right at the eye socket, just below the
Mhm.
eye. And so the woman actress, she's holding the head, and she has her hand on that bulb. And the other guy has got his knife, and he's cutting the eye out. And I filled it just with black coffee, and she gave that thing a squeeze, and it shot out, and it hit him right in the middle of the chest. So he's wearing this white shirt,
Uh,
and he's got this black stain that's about a foot in diameter on his chest.
Jeez.
And
That's
everybody's just like, "Oh my god!" And I'm just like, "Oh my god, this is amazing."
No, that's awesome, especially getting to do that live, like getting to kind of see the crowd's reaction
Oh,
as you see
it
that
was just
play out.
it was priceless. It
I
was
Yeah, I
priceless.
imagine that was immensely satisfying.
Yeah, yeah. So, and getting into the haunted house business. Now I had a, this is my segue, I guess here. I have been a horror fan since I was a little kid. I mean, we're talking like 6 years old. I'd be watching, the Wolfman and Frankenstein and Dracula, and I had all the Aurora monster models. I still have a bunch of them actually. That I put together when I was a kid, and I would decorate my bedroom. I would like ban my parents from my bedroom for like a few days at a time and decorate the whole thing like a haunted house, and then I would let them in and scare them and stuff. So I've been like this since I was little. Um, but having done that play, that was like an amazing experience. But when I got out of high school, it was like back in 1981. I wound up working for Morris Costumes, which is still based in Charlotte, and they are one of the largest supplier for the haunted house industry. Not only mom and pop costume shops, like in here in Richmond, we've got Premier Costumes. Um, so they would supply small mom and pop costume shops with all their masks and costumes and magic, tricks and all sorts of stuff like that. As well as back in the day, we're talking about, it was mostly the JCs that were doing haunted houses. They would actually get like an old building that should have been condemned, and let the general public in there,
Well, that's
and
probably
they.
the most natural place to have a haunted house, right?
Well, it is. You can't do that today.
I imagine not.
The fire code requirements. This is why most haunted houses, commercial haunted houses, are in warehouses with sprinkler systems and emergency lighting and all sorts of stuff like that.
Hmm.
So, but I was working for this company back in 1981, and they had published a book. Phil Morris, who owned the company, wrote a book on how to operate a financially successful haunted house. And it was like a go-to guide for the JCs, and it had all the tricks and illusions and all sorts of stuff. Not only how to market and do everything from ticket sales and how to deal
That
with
everything you need to
customers.
run a business, haunted
Yeah,
house edition.
exactly. And so I was determined that is what I wanted to do. I wanted to run my own haunted house. So in 1995, now Jody and I had moved up to Ashland in 94. I found out that the Hanover Tavern, which is over on 301 by the courthouse there, that's almost a 300-year-old building. It was owned by Patrick Henry's father-in-law. Patrick Henry was a bartender there.
Wow.
I found out that they had done a haunted history tour the year before. So I got myself a meeting with their directors. It's actually owned by a nonprofit foundation. And I said, how much money did you guys raise last year? And they told me $1,000. And I said to them, I will rent this building from you for $1,000 if you let me produce the entire event and take all the ticket sales proceeds in. And that's how I produced my first haunted house.
And have you done any more like haunted house productions since then, or do you have your own yearly haunted house that you do?
I don't have my yearly haunted house. It's a really, really tough business. So that was
I
night.
imagine
Go ahead.
there's a weird amount of competition in the Richmond area, considering we've got like Busch Gardens and then also King's Dominion plus Ashland Berry Farms and
Well, yes and
a
no.
couple others.
I think there's plenty of demand. The biggest challenge is marketing, is letting people know you have a haunt and producing something that is, a quality that people will want to come back to, and making it through your
Hmm.
first year. Because I mean, bluntly,
That
I've
is
lost a bunch of money that year, and I was like, well, I can't do this again, not in this way. Okay, so that's 1995. Well, 1999, this is again before like the before websites were really a thing. Certainly before it's Facebook. Okay, certainly before Facebook. It was websites, but there was mostly like message board communication. So I
Yeah.
found out that there was a local radio station that was going to do a haunted attraction in downtown Richmond, actually on Mayo Island, 14th Street Bridge.
Okay. Yeah.
And they had contracted or were meeting with a company out of Delaware to come in and produce their haunted attraction. And the company out of Delaware was looking for somebody local to head up the construction. Okay. So
Okay.
I found this through a message board. And so I got invited to the meeting with the radio station, the haunted attraction. It was a guy who has a haunted attraction up there. It's a really really big one up in Delaware. But so that's why they had contacted him and myself. And after the initial meeting, the guy from Delaware decided that this wasn't for him. It wasn't a good fit for him. And I asked him, I said, "Do you mind if I pursue this on my own?" He said, "No, go right ahead." And so I got a contract to design and direct a haunted attraction to go on Mayo Island, like in the buildings down there. And once we wound up meeting with the city, so the radio station had their own. They had an architect. They had a engineer. They had me as the creative designer, and of course, they had the guy who basically had the lease on the property down there at the time. And so, but for every one of us, the city of Richmond had somebody. And for everything that we brought up, they had an objection. And the bottom line is it was going to cost over $100,000 just to bring the building up to code in order for them to let us do the haunted attraction in the building. And this was the real kicker, that because of the fact that the flooding of the James River, anything that we put in that building had to be able to be taken out with a 24-hour notice. In other words, completely cleaned out. So you didn't have debris washing down the river. And so the whole thing died, like in
Huh.
the month of August.
Dang. Died in the womb. Didn't quite
Right,
make it to
exactly,
production.
exactly. So that was the year 1999. So in 2000, I found out, and again, this is through an email list. Okay, so the way we communicated back then was really funny. You didn't have Facebook, and it wasn't even AOL instant messaging. This was all email lists and message boards. And turns out that Morris Costumes, the company that I worked for in Charlotte, North Carolina for 3 years, 1981 through 84, when I graduated from high school, this largest distributor in the country, basically for Halloween props and things, they were building their own haunted house in Charlotte. And it was designed by Leonard Pickle, who is one of the leading designers in the haunt industry. And so I contacted Jim Lawrence, who's still the sales manager for Morris Costumes. So I worked with Jim like back in 1981 when I was working there. And it's like, "Jim, I hear Phil's building a haunted house. Do you guys need any help?" And he said, "Well, Leonard's in charge of that. You just contact him." So I messaged Leonard and I said, "Hey, do you guys need any help on the haunted house?" And his response was, "Can you use a screw gun?" And I said, "When do you want me there?" Because my parents were still living in Charlotte. So I was able to go back down and stay with them. And I wound up working, and it was $1 million haunted attraction. Yeah. So I wound up working that
Wow.
summer on that. And I was building scenery, and we were installing pneumatic animatronics, the kinds of things that you see. Well, so they sold this stuff to theme parks, and this was also their showroom. So if you've ever been to Busch Gardens or King's Dominion, and you've seen like a guy in an electric chair, like thrashing around, or a gargoyle whose wings open up, or a hanging dude whose feet kick. I mean,
This
all of
is
that stuff. These are like anywhere from $5,000 to $20,000 animatronics, and we installed all that stuff: the
Wow.
lighting, the pneumatic lines, the everything, the controllers, the motion sensors, or pressure pads, or whatever it is that So also that year, well, actually, it was 1999 that Busch Gardens started doing their Hello Scream. So, it's kind of a funny thing, because if you go back to the 1970s and 1980s, it was the JCs that were doing the nonprofit haunted houses and the old buildings, in the middle of a city with lines going around the block. And then what happened is Spooky World opened in Berlin, Massachusetts, and they became a haunted attraction on a farm with like 13 different attractions. They would have big headliners like Elvira come down there, and Tom Savini, makeup artists and stuff that you could meet, or actors that had been in movies like the guy who played Jason or Freddy Krueger or whatever. They were doing $2 million
Right.
in ticket sales in the month of October at their peak. So the theme parks were like, holy
Wow.
smokes, um, we can capitalize, we can extend our
We
season.
can capitalize
And
on that.
so
Yeah.
Busch Gardens in 1999 started doing Hello Scream. So when I found out that they were doing that, I contacted them to see if they were hiring, and I wasn't interested in a job like as an actor, because I was like, how do I get in on this from a design level or creative level of some sort? So I didn't get hired by them in either 1999 or 2000. But what was great, and in the year 2000, I guess it was 2000, in the year 2001, they said, well, King's Dominion's getting ready to do their own. So I contacted King's Dominion, this is in the year 2001, and was like, hey, I am a haunted house guy, would love to work on your design, build, install crew, whatnot. And let me tell you, navigating the theme park industry to do anything creative, it's its own lesson in how do you do this, right? Well, you have to be like water. Every time you hit an obstacle, you have to go around it, through it, whatever. But if you stop, you're done. So the biggest, back to your original question, is to like, how do you do this? How do you do things like make money doing it? You have to be relentless. You have to
Hmm.
be so persistent, and you have to want to do it more than anything. And
And it's funny listening to you talk about like some of this stuff. Like I hear the level of pneumatics that they're using in some of these props. And in my mind, I'm thinking like on top of art school, do you have to like get
well,
certified in like hydraulics and pneumatics? Like there's obviously a lot that goes into it. It's a wonder. I certainly hope art
well, there's
schools have some kind of business or
right, there should
marketing
be, and and
courses,
and I've learned a
especially
lot of
now
stuff by
with the
trial and
internet.
error. But here's the most important thing. The most important thing is not that you know how to do something. The most important thing is that you know where to find somebody who knows how to do something that you can't do, because you can build a team. So it's really more about project management than
Hmm.
anything else. Like let's say it's a bronze sculpture, all right, and let's say you are really good at sculpting in clay, right? You can work
Right.
clay, and you can do a copy of me. You can do something completely original, whatever. Okay, well, that's fine. You got it to a certain stage. How do you make that into a bronze statue? When you have a bronze statue, how do you put it on a foundation? How do what are all the steps to get this from an idea and even a piece of clay? Like maybe you're good at sculpting in clay, but you're not so good at building armatures, right? Because you have to put your clay over something. So you might hire somebody who is great at
Hmm.
structural, armature building. It could be welding, it could be however you want to make this thing. The Neptune statue in Virginia Beach, the armature for that was made in China, and it was done in brick.
That doesn't seem intuitive at all.
Well, there's a really great documentary on the building of that. It was on PBS for a while. And you could probably find it, but it's a really great documentary. And that in itself is a whole lesson in this process of how do you go from getting a commission for something to submitting your idea and design for it, and then how do you translate that? How do you take that and turn it into, like I said, you might have the best idea in the world, and you sculpt this beautiful statue of Neptune that's about 2 feet tall, and say, yeah, we're going to take that and we're going to make it, 20 feet tall. How are you going to do that?
Right. That yeah,
So,
at that point, you're talking more about engineering, beyond the art itself. Yeah.
and bronze casting and all those issues. So being able to sculpt is just like, hey, yeah, you got to have the idea. You got to be able to execute it and project manage, right? Art direct. But being an artist in the commercial art world, in terms of public art, even with murals, I mean, you look at mural artists, usually they have like a team of people working with them. Like it's just such a huge canvas that they're working on, right? That to
Right.
do it all by themselves would be like, and so it's not exactly paint by number, but the artist is done the initial design, and it's like, hey, here's a paintbrush, take this area right here and paint it this color, and then I'll come in and add my shadows and highlights and whatever's. um, but the point is that you can't just hand anybody a paintbrush. They've got to have some level of skill in what they're doing and be comfortable using a scissor lift or whatever, you know what I mean? And it's like,
Yeah.
harnesses, safety issues, there's all sorts of stuff involved. So
Listening to you describe this makes me feel like probably every artist on a certain, like, it's no wonder Leonardo da Vinci was like busy building and designing all kinds of crazy things, because to it sounds like to be a great artist, you're pretty much going to have to be a renaissance man, in the sense that you're going to have to know how to do a lot of things.
well, I'll just say this: it certainly helps, and it certainly opens up the scope, the projects that um, you can take you can take on. Now, I'll be perfectly honest. When I first got into doing this, and it was doing mostly like specialty props, special effects kind of stuff, and I would have a client who had some crazy idea, and I would be like, "Oh, sure, I can do that," and I would just throw some dollar amount at it that was just random, and I would get the project, and I'd be like, "Oh crap, how am I going to do this?" I mean, really. And
Just scrape them off the ceiling and hope that hope that whatever falls down works.
I have had some spectacular failures. Let me be honest about that. But at this point, normally I have so much experience under my belt where if somebody wants something and I give them a price on it, usually before I give them the price, I know, if not exactly how I'm going to accomplish it, I have a pretty darn good idea of how I'm going to approach it, what the materials cost, how much it, like, I mean, I just did a project. My most recent one was for the Virginia Highlands Festival up in Abingdon, Virginia. And I
Okay.
did,
I've heard of that
yeah,
festival.
it's really cool. And I did this thing called
Yeah.
the Wolf Crystal. They wrote a script, and we're doing an outdoor live theatrical performance. And so they needed a sculpture done. And they were referred to me by a mutual friend. And they said, hey, we're doing this show, and we've got the storyline where there's this magical crystal that keeps the wolves warm in the wintertime and it gets stolen. So we need somebody to design and build the crystal. And I was like, oh, that sounds really, really cool. So my first inclination was that, well, it's got to be big because it's an outdoor live theatrical production. So I designed something that was like 5 feet tall. And my first instinct was something like the Dark Crystal, a
Okay.
vertical thing, multifaceted, right? So
Right.
I'm thinking, well, if each face, if you think about a diamond, all right, a diamond, a cut diamond, every face of it is a flat plane.
Okay.
So if I
Yeah.
take a structure and I make a whatever the shape is, but if each face of it is a flat plane, I should be able to make it out of any kind of flat sheet material. All I have to do is cut each face of this thing into the right shape and it would all go together. So I figured I could make this thing out of plexiglass. So I'm going to make a
Hmm.
5 foot tall plexiglass box that is multifaceted. Um, and I know because it's 5 feet tall that it's going to take more than one sheet of plexiglass because plexiglass, it's 4 feet by 8 feet. So I can't, if I made it 4 feet tall, I'd be able to get more pieces out of it. But 4 feet's a lot less impressive than 5 feet, right? So as soon as you go beyond a certain dimension that your stock material comes in, you've just doubled the amount of material it's going to take to
Huh.
make it. Just because you can't get, I can get 4 2 foot by 4 feet rectangles out of a 4 by 8 sheet.
Right. Okay.
But once I go up to 5 feet, I can only get two pieces out of it.
Right. So this is where the project management part comes in, and also probably the kind of the kind of what's the word I'm looking for? The sort of expertise you're really only going to get when you've been in the field for a period of time. I know you said you got a bit of experience.
All right. Well, right. So let's say now I'm talking about, okay, it's going to be 5 feet tall. It's going to take at least two sheets of plexiglass, maybe three. Okay, I don't want to take more than that, but let's say it's going to take three sheets of plexiglass. Plexiglass runs just quarter-inch thick clear plexiglass runs like $200 a sheet. And if I'm going to have it all cut out, CNC'd by computerized, router kind of
Hmm.
thing,
No, I
I'm
used to
going to
be a
double my
CNC
cost of it.
machinist actually.
All right, so my cost just doubled. So I'm looking at 246. I'm looking at $1,200 just to have the faces of this thing cut out. I don't know what it's going to look like exactly, but I can ballpark that in 5 minutes and go, well, yeah, it'd be about $1,200 just to. That's my cost,
Right.
right?
Not to
So I
mention
have to
your time and the other materials you
well,
incidentally. Yeah.
yeah, right. So I have to at least double that amount to make money off of it. So now we're looking at $2,400 for this thing, or whatever. And so what's cool about the way we actually wound up making it is I wound up carving about 10 inches tall a model of this crystal out of floral foam. And I literally took like a handsaw, like a not a hacksaw, but a regular wood handsaw, and I just started carving into the floral foam because I wanted each face of it to be straight, right?
Hmm.
So I wanted a big blade, so when I cut it, it was just a nice big straight cut, and and did a few different versions of it until I got one that I liked, and then from there made a 3D computer model. Now, I would have done it myself, but at the time, I was having surgery done on my arm because my hand had gone numb. I had a pinched nerve, and so actually had a 14-year-old kid. I'd actually put a thing out there on the RVA Makers Forum saying, "Hey, I need some help with this project. I need some 3D modeling done, and some of this and some of that." And this guy said, "Hey, would you be willing to work with my 14-year-old son?" And I was like, well, sure. What does he do? And he said, well, he does, 3D printing. I was like, well, does he just like download models and print them, or does he do design work? He said, oh no, he designs. He designed his own lightsaber handle and stuff. So yeah, I
Wow.
saw the kid's work, and it was amazing. His name is Gavin Orr, and so he worked with me. We carved the foam models, and then he took some photographs of it. And 2 hours later, he emails me a rendering of a 3D computer model of this thing, right?
Wow.
And I look at it and go, well, those angles there are a little bit extreme. Can you pull this vertex down and raise that one up and sort of even that line out a little bit? He does that, resends me a rendering. I'm like, okay, perfect. Now what I need, because my left hand doesn't work, I can't do this myself. I need each face of that computer model extrapolated as a vector drawing so we can CNC this thing out.
Hmm.
So he emails me the vector files for that, and then I was able to do a small scale model. I did my first one out of paper, actually, make sure all the pieces fit, and then emailed the files to a company that just CNC'd all of my plexi and comes delivered to me, and all I had to do was assemble it. It's like I designed like a giant model kit, if you will, right?
Wow.
Then I had to figure out how I'm going to put all this together because plexiglass, normally you would use acrylic adhesive. And if you're making an aquarium, a cube, that's fairly easy because you put it on one edge and you put the two corners together, and it's like an
Right.
instant, right?
The edges fit together nicely.
Yeah, but there's not a square edge on this thing. This thing is like crazy
Right.
looking. So I got to figure out how to put it together. Box that's 5 feet tall, about 2 feet around, and every shape is like weird. It's triangular or like a trapezoidish kind of a thing, and all these random angles, and so I wound up trying Flex Seal, the stuff they advertise on TV.
Yeah.
Hey, Phil Swift here for Flex Seal. And they make a tape, and they make a clear tape. Now, the importance of this being clear is this thing was going to be lit from the inside. Okay.
Huh.
So
Okay.
if it weren't lit, I could have made like a frame. I could have made either wood or even steel, made some sort of cage that I could attach like if it were plywood, I could have made some sort of frame on the inside, then attach the plywood to it. But this had to be clear. Anything that I put on the inside would create a shadow, so it couldn't have anything structural on the inside of it. So I'm like, how am I going to do this? So I wound up taking just a sample, just two small pieces of plexiglass, and I got the clear Flex Seal tape and taped these two things together, and I could barely pull them apart. I mean, that stuff is like amazing. And so I literally taped the whole thing together.
Huh.
So
That that sounds, I don't know, not as good as a steel frame, but if you need it to be clear, then at that point it's like a riddle.
it is, yeah, yeah. So I taped the thing together. It was surprisingly strong, just taped together. And what was nice about it is that the Flex Seal, because it's tape, right? I was able to take one panel and leave it so that it would open up like a door, and the tape itself worked as the hinge. I was able just to
Ah,
open it up and then close it, and just put a little tab of tape on there to tape it shut. But after I assembled the whole thing, it's still just a clear box. So the shape is
right.
good, but I want it to look like I was thinking like a Himalayan salt lamp because I have one at my
Okay.
house, and that was the thing I was looking at most frequently. It's like, okay, it's got to be textured, it has to be colored, and it has to be textured, right? So what I wound up doing was covering it in fiberglass resin, polyester resin. So fiberglass properly is really two things. One, there's the fiberglass cloth, which is really the glass fibers, and then there's the
Right.
resin. And so the resin, you add a little bit of a hardener to it, and you paint it on basically, or spray it on, or whatever. But you paint it, then you lay the cloth into that wet resin, and then it hardens. And that's what the fiberglass is. You do like 2 or 3 layers of that normally. Well, the resin has a natural amber kind of a hue to it, right? So when I
Mhm.
painted it over the plexiglass, it gave me this nice kind of golden hue. And the more layers I put on, the richer it looked, right? So I'm
Hmm.
building up these layers because then again, it's lit from the inside. So I'm building up these layers of resin over the plexiglass. But then I wanted some texture in there. Now I had taken a concrete sculpting workshop, literally sculpting in wet concrete, and you know, it works almost like clay. There's a special formulation of this stuff. It's called vertical concrete carving, and it works like clay. You sculpt with it, and it hardens, and you have a permanent sculpture. But while I was taking that workshop, um, they for the base coat that they were putting over making like a tree stump that was about 2 feet in diameter and about 3 feet tall. It was a piece of styrofoam, and they put a base coat on there of concrete, and they added chopped fiberglass into the concrete. Now,
Huh.
if you look at the back, if you look at a bathtub or shower that's fiberglass, if you look at the back of it, you can see the chopped fiberglass pattern in there. They don't use the cloth. They actually use, it's actually a gun. It has this like rope of fiberglass that goes up into it. And it's hooked, when you pull the trigger, it's like, an air compressor on it to shoot it out. But it chops the strands and makes these little short fibers about an inch long or so and shoots them into the resin. Well, I wanted just the short fibers. So, I go down to Home Depot and I'm like, do you guys have chopped fiberglass? And they're like, huh? They've got the cloth. And so I called my friends down at Dreamcrete. They're down off of, near 288 and Old 100 Road, that area. Um,
Yeah. Okay.
and anyway, that's where I had done the workshop. And I was like, hey, guys, I'm looking for some chopped fiberglass. Do you know of anybody in Richmond that carries it? And they're like, well, we sell it. And I was like, oh, I didn't even think about that. So um, I was going to go down there and do some styrofoam work as well and get some concrete coating products because I made my base in concrete. But in any case, I went down there and got the chopped fiberglass, and then I was able to just kind of throw it onto the crystal after put my resin on and just threw some chopped fiberglass in there, and it gave me like this really really neat texture. So it wound up looking a lot like that Himalayan salt crystal kind of look I was going for. Wound up
Mm-hmm.
looking a lot like that. I've got pictures of it online. I'll share some with you. Um,
Awesome. Yeah, that'd be great. I can put the pictures into the video.
yeah,
So usually I just use a boring standard template.
yeah, 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 yeah,
Uh,
yeah, yeah.
but no, that would be
So I've
awesome.
actually got I've actually got video of the thing, working and everything. So I'll share that stuff with you. But
Awesome.
and so and then so here's where it gets kind of interesting too, right? So this thing is supposed to be wolf themed because it's called the wolf crystal. So I'm
Right.
like, okay, it needs to be big, outdoor theatrical production. So I'm going to make it 5 feet tall. If I made it any bigger than that, again, the cost of it would go up so much. If you think about, I try to explain this to people when we're talking about scale of something. Let's say you have something that is a 1 foot cube. It's 1 foot by 1 foot by 1 foot, right?
Right.
And let's say that thing, let's say it's a bust, a statue of somebody, and it'll fit inside a box that big, right? I'm going to do
All right.
the head of Beethoven, right? So we're going to sculpt this in
All right.
clay, and then we're going to make a mold. We're going to cast it, and I can do that project for, I don't know, maybe it's $2,000, whatever it winds up being. So somebody says, okay, well, I want to double the size of it. That would be like $4,000, right? I'm like,
Right.
well, now you're talking about 2 feet by 2 feet by 2 feet, which is
So it's actually quadrupled in price.
it's 8 cubic feet. It's
Right.
not 4 cubic feet. It's 2 by 2 by 2. You have
Right.
just gone up eightfold.
Jeez.
Yes.
There's some pretty basic math that people conveniently overlook, I'm sure.
Well, okay. So there's the thing, right? So one, having a really good understanding of geometry, right, and understanding
Right.
space, right? Because if I'm going to do a well, let's take the head of Beethoven as an example, right? How much clay do I need to make that? Well, it's a foot by a foot by a foot, so I need a cubic foot of clay to do this, minus the size of my armature that might be inside. But let's just say I'm working in clay. I need a cubic foot of clay to do that. If I'm going to double the size, I may need 8 cubic feet of clay. Clay, if you use water as your base, water weighs about 8 pounds a gallon, more or less, right? There's about
Right.
8 gallons of water in a cubic foot. So you're talking about 64 pounds per cubic foot. So
Oh,
if I just
geez.
went 8 times that size, I just made a 500-pound sculpture. I mean, it just goes up super super fast, right? Well, so not only
Right.
let's stick to the 1 foot box, right? So now I need a cubic foot of clay. How much mold making material do I need to cover this? So I'm going to make a rubber mold 1/2 inch thick over this entire bust, right? Well,
Right.
if you take a box, it's a square foot on each side of the box, right? One by one.
All right.
There's 6 faces to the box. So each face is a square foot. The whole surface area of the box is 6 square feet, right?
Jeez.
So if I go 6 square feet by half an inch thick, how many cubic inches is that? So you have to calculate all this stuff. That's how much mold making material I need. That's just for the base coat. And then I need, so if my material is $100 a gallon, I'm using silicone. How many gallons of silicone do I need just to make the mold half an inch thick?
Yeah, that's going to be an awfully expensive project, just from a few different materials needed. Not to
And
mention if you
so
need.
that's your basic starting point, which is why basically I just sort of tell
Right.
people, if you don't have $1,000 to spend at minimum to spend on your project, I can't help you because it's going to cost me almost
Right.
that in materials just to do anything.
Right. To even start putting this on paper.
Right, right,
You
right. And
yeah, it's
so what happens is people come to me and they have like an idea. Well, what would it cost to do X, Y, Z, right? And for the longest time, I had an impossible time getting their budget out of them. I'd be like, well, what's your budget? Well, we don't know. What would it cost to do this? I'm like, it all depends on how far you want to go. I mean, this is like, so you know what I finally wound up doing? And this works amazingly well. So after going back and forth 2 or 3 times about budget and not getting an answer, I'm like, well, we could go, we could do something small for $1,000, but I don't think that's gonna, you know, really do what you want it to do. Or we could look at $10,000, or we could look at $100,000. So if we're going to make it out of bronze, I mean, a 5 foot tall bronze statue, you're looking at least 50 grand.
yeah, I mean, that sounds about right, I would
Yeah,
think. Like, yeah, it just,
yeah, yeah,
and this is me with 0
yeah. I
experience.
mean, the
The I
foundry and everything and all the costs. That's you're 5 and 5 feet. If you're talking like 8 or 9 feet tall, because generally speaking, when something's outdoors, it's got to be bigger than life size in order to give an impression. And I don't.
Yeah, if you put a 6-foot tall statue on a 10-foot platform, it's gonna look pretty small all the way up
Well,
there.
I don't know if you remember, but when Short Pump Town Center first opened, they had these bronze statues on pedestals. It was like Ella Fitzgerald and um, it might have been Bill Bojangles Robinson. I forget who all they had, but
Oh, yeah, I do remember seeing
do you remember
those.
how
Yeah.
small they looked?
Yeah.
They were life size. That's because they were life size. But
There's the,
in a giant
I
open
think
space
the
like that, they look tiny.
I think Jackson Ward also has a Bojangles
It
statue that
does.
suffers from basically the same thing. Like, when you drive by, it looks teeny.
Yeah, yeah. So the Maggie Walker statue is great because she's super impressive. She's probably, I don't know, she's 10 or 12 feet tall, but she's big.
Oh, yeah, she's at least double.
Yeah,
She's at least
yeah.
double. I used to work at that Max's right
Oh
there,
yeah, yeah,
actually. Yeah, they were super happy when they put the statue right out front because they finally got to close off that little road right
yeah,
there so they
yeah.
could make a
Okay,
patio,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
which
yeah, yeah.
frankly is super
It is
nice.
nice. I saw
Yeah,
that. I saw that. So,
yeah.
yeah. So when you say from a perspective of somebody, a student who's an art student, you got a degree. Um, I don't know honestly what they're teaching in art degrees. If is this more about art history and or how much of it is about hands-on? Is it more about design? Like, for example, like the store Anthropology. Um, for their windows, I know a lot of times they will use art students to design their windows. And I've seen really
Okay.
cool constructions in the windows that are made out of nothing but um, construction paper loops or some found objects like the core of a roll of tape or something like that, right? And I mean, hundreds of these things linked together to make some kind of cool, abstract art kind of a thing. It's like,
Mhm.
okay, that's neat, right? You've got some some cool design skills, and sort of making contemporary abstract art. But let's say a client saw that and said, "Okay, can you make that out of stainless steel? 50 feet long? What are you going to do?"
Well, geez, you're gonna go broke.
Well, no, I mean, what I'm saying is, how are you going to figure it out? How are you going to figure the project
uh,
out?
Yeah, I suppose that's if you need to have a strong, at least a background in math of some kind, geometry, and I mean, as far as filling that space goes, which weirdly enough, that I don't know, there's definitely a big combination between left and right brain
Well,
talents
there
that goes
is.
in
There is.
once you get into the sculpting by the
All
sounds of
right,
it.
so let's go back to the wolf crystal sculpture. So now I got to figure out how to make this thing wolf themed, right? So what am I going to do? How do I make
Right.
this a wolf? So one thought I had, since I'm going to have lights on the inside of it, was to actually make a sculpture of a wolf head out of something, whatever it is, doesn't matter. But inside of this thing, so that when the lights shine on it, it casts a shadow of the wolf head on each face of the crystal.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. So that was one idea. But then what I decided to do was have a base that looked like a cluster of crystals. You know how it's like crystals will grow in groups, like
Yeah, like a geode.
yeah, yeah. So
Okay. Yeah.
so what I wanted to do was have like some of these growing out and terminating in wolf heads, as if they just sort of naturally grew like that.
Hmm. Okay.
So I wound up sculpting these things in clay, making a silicone mold. I sculpted, they did three different versions, one looking straight ahead, kind of howling, one with his head turned to the left, one with his head turned to the right. Sculpted three of these, made silicone molds, and I cast them in a clear two-part epoxy. So when you put a light on the end of it, the whole thing lit up. So
Huh.
that's six of these wolf heads radiating out from the base with some smaller crystals around them. Okay. But so here's the interesting thing, is that silicone, this was a tin based silicone. Silicone is either tin or platinum based, but this is a tin based silicone. And because of I'm using silicone to make the mold, which is going over clay, I have to make sure,
Mm-hmm.
one, that I absolutely cannot use a water based clay because water will keep silicone from curing. You'll just get a nasty mess. Um,
Oh.
but interestingly, it can't have any sulfur in it either. So regular plasticine clay, like Roma plastilina kind of thing, they have sulfur in them. So you have to sculpt in a non-sulfur clay so it doesn't have a chemical reaction with the silicone.
Huh.
So not only,
So
not only, the,
did you have to order a special clay just to get the project
oh,
done?
absolutely, yeah, yeah, yeah. So there's a company called
Wow.
Chavant, and they have NSP. So but what I'm getting at is that not only do you have to have geometry and some level of engineering sense, but there's also chemistry.
Yeah, I was gonna say it almost sounds like a pharmacist. Like you have to make sure the things that don't react poorly to one another.
Absolutely. So you need to know your materials, and you need to have some kind of basic lab skills. Like, did you take chemistry in high school?
Oh yeah, yeah, I did
Okay,
actually.
so if you are going to measure the weight of a liquid in a container, let's say you need, I don't know, 50 grams of whatever it is. Let's just say it's water, right? I need 50 grams of
Right.
water, but I'm using a glass container. The first thing you have to do is weigh the container empty, so you know how many grams the container is, so that when you have it on the scale and add your water, let's say the container is 10 grams, right? When
Right.
it's on your scale and you add the water in, you need to go up to 60 grams in order to have 50 grams of water.
True, true. Okay.
So if I am mixing silicone with a catalyst, and it's a 1 to 10 ratio. So if I have, let's say, 100 grams of silicone, I need 10 grams of catalyst. And if my container weighs 5 grams, okay, and I don't take that into account, I'm going to have 95 grams of silicone and 5 grams of catalyst because I didn't weigh my container and subtract the weight.
Right. So then
So,
everything gets thrown off, and then
and you
if
just
the
wasted,
worst happens,
and you just
you
wasted
wasted all that
a
material.
hundred.
Yeah.
Not only the material, but cleaning it off your project. Oh my God! Now you've got stuff that won't cure on your sculpture that you've spent weeks on or whatever. It's just like, I mean, it's a disaster of unimaginable proportions.
A compounding problem. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And especially if you're on a time schedule and you just totally screwed yourself because you got to pretty much
Right.
start all over again. The material costs aside.
Right. And then if you're working on a tighter budget, then you've taken a project that was supposed to make you some money, and now you're working to try and lose as little as possible.
Exactly, exactly. And
Right.
sometimes you just have to take the hits and be. This is why the whole concept of working for exposure is such a joke, because any project you do should
Is
be
exposure.
for
Yeah,
exposure. Exactly, exactly.
absolutely. You could
So
do it for free in a park, and I mean, it's going to cost you an arm and a leg, but you don't have
right,
to do it for a business if you wanted exposure.
right. But why shouldn't I get paid also as well as have exposure? You know what I mean? It's
Right.
like the exposure is the bonus.
And it's unfortunate because of the number of people that really don't know they don't know that their art is worth something almost, or like they're just really desperate for the exposure,
Hmm,
and the
hmm.
people willing to work for free are costing career artists that money. I mean, at the end of the day, not I'm not necessarily saying you should bring back guilds and trade unions, especially
No, but
not for something like
there's
art.
something to be said for it.
There
Absolutely.
is something to be said for it, that, like, you every anybody who's listening that's an artist should know that your art is automatically worth at least your time and material. Like, you have to charge for it or you're hurting everyone else.
Right, and as long as there's somebody willing to do it cheaper, I mean, it's like sending stuff to China for fact. It's like,
Exactly.
what's the point here? We're all shooting ourselves in the foot, right? So,
And to
I just had a conversation with somebody about a Christmas project that they came to me about. They wanted something really cool, and I
mhm.
was like, okay, this would be really really fun to work with. And they were like, okay, well, what would it cost? And then I'm like, oh well, what's your budget? So they told me they had like $1,000 that they were figuring, and I just did a really quick breakdown of materials. And I was like, even to do a really simple version of this thing is going to be like $1,000 in materials. I said, I think maybe I could do something for like 2,500, but there's no way I could make money, doing this for $1,000. And so it's a nonprofit foundation, and they always have these really quirky things about how they spend money and raising money. So anyway, they came back to me and said, well, we really want to do this, but it's going to take us a couple of months to get the funds together for this. So can we look at doing this next year? And I'm like, sure. And see, so that is a realistic conversation. It's not like, all right, I'll do it for your $1,000. I'll take the hit and I'll get some exposure. It's no, this is what it would take to do this. This is a business. I'm in this because this is my living. This is what I do. In order to do this, and the other thing is that my work has reached a certain level of professionalism over the last 20 years, where 20 years ago I was kind of doing anything just to get my hands on it, that it's going to hurt me to do something that isn't up to the quality that I've established, right?
Absolutely. Well,
So,
not only does it hurt you as the artist, trying to get paid and also protect your brand, but it also, in a way, it hurts the people enjoying the art too, because if people are willing to do it for just the $1,000, they're not going to be delivered as good of a project, as good of a final
Oh,
product.
absolutely, absolutely. But I'm just saying,
Yeah,
just in terms of my own brand, I've established a brand of quality, right? So
right,
I have gotten to the point where, um, I don't want to do a project, even if I could make a buck off of it, if it's not something I'm willing to share and show, right? So that
right,
exposure bit becomes part and parcel of the process, right? I'm only doing this because not only will I make money off of it, but this is a direction that I think is really cool. I want to take my work in this direction. So, but if it's not even a direction I want to take my work, where I wouldn't want to even show it off, it's about a lot more than just making a buck. It's like everything you do becomes part of your brand. Why take on work that is in a direction that you don't want to do? Because when people see it, you'll probably get more work in that direction. So if you don't want to go
right.
there, don't do it. Or if you do,
No,
if you do do it like it's like Stephen King writing under the name Richard Bachman or something. You know what I mean? You can do something, but be careful about.
associating your own brand with it,
Correct.
if it's not something that you're willing to take on, as
Yeah.
far
I
as,
mean,
yeah, and
I'll do some framing carpentry for somebody or something, build a little shed in their backyard or something, but it's not something I'm going to promote on my Facebook page or my website along with my art, because I don't want to be out there building sheds for
that
people.
that actually does, you bring up the Facebook page. That actually brings me to, the last question I wanted to ask
Hmm.
you, because you're in the art world, and you've obviously been doing it for a while, and you've been in it long enough to see things move digitally.
Hmm.
And, I kinda have a theory that, as far as, like, art galleries and these public spaces that we go to,
Hmm.
the art galleries are gonna end up being, like, sort of a mecca, I think, in a lot of ways, like, in the way that people see, New York, or even, even in a lot of ways, Richmond or, like, Savannah, Georgia, as a place to be if you want to promote your art. But then to make it more accessible, things kind of moving to the online space. Do you think, like, online art galleries, do you think that that's going to get bigger and bigger in a world that's getting more occupied by people who are like Instagram influencers?
Well, I mean, it's a good question. There's a couple things to consider. One is that not even sculpture, but just painting. Um, if you've been to the VM, Virginia Museum, yeah,
VMFA?
VMFA, right? You've been there.
Yeah.
All right. When you walk in there and you look at a painting, especially if it's one that you are familiar with, right? By a famous
Mhm.
painter, and you look at it for the first time up close, and you see all of that detail, all the brushstrokes, so the size of it is. I mean, some of these things are like wall sized, right? And you see that,
Mhm.
and your heart kind of like skips a beat. You're like, oh my god, I had no idea.
I definitely know exactly what you mean. When you see a picture of a painting on your phone, it's the size of your thumb, but then you go and see it in person to find out that it's, 6 feet tall by 12
I
feet wide, and you feel like
know.
you're sucked
I
into it.
know,
It
right? So,
Yeah.
and even if you saw a person standing next to it, a picture of somebody standing next to it, it still no way compares to actually standing in front of it, right?
Mhm.
So, so the place for galleries will always be there because
Oh,
seeing
absolutely.
art in real life just in no way compares to um, I think online is a good place to sell prints of your work, like giclées or whatever, because
Oh, yeah, certainly.
it's another step, removed from the original. What I use Facebook for is, well, just like right now, you and I talking. Okay, I use it for networking. I get a lot of my commissions from Facebook leads. I'll see some.
Oh, that's
Well, I do.
awesome.
I'll see somebody. Now, very few people contact me and say, "Hey, I want something," but it has happened. I've had two people this year contact me, say, "Hey, we were looking for something." The wolf crystal happened that way. They contacted me because of mutual friend who I've only met in person twice, but he's a Facebook friend and he knows what I do and I know what he does. And he just happened to go to grade school with the executive director of the Virginia Highlands Festival, and she was in Richmond. Um, there was a Virginia Commission for the Arts event, and so she was talking to him about this project, and he said, "Oh, I know just the guy."
Huh.
So I can't say enough about self promotion. You have to promote your work. You have to let people know what you do. Um, but you also have to keep your eyes open for opportunity. So one of the sort of standard ways for artists to get work is RFPs, requests for proposals. So let's say a municipality has some money in a public art budget, and they say, we are looking for an artist to create I actually submitted a proposal for the public safety memorial down on the grounds of the General Assembly building. Um, that was we didn't get the project, but that was about $1 million proposal that I partnered with Tom Wright. He's a local sculptor in Richmond that I've worked with, and also Kuser Fountain Works, who Kuser did the giant globe out in front of the Science Museum,
All right.
and
Yeah.
I've partnered with them before on a fountain. So we all kind of sort of a three-way collaboration put in a proposal for $1 million project. We didn't get it, and it was about a month just to put that proposal together. So it's a lot of work, or it can be. But the idea is that it could be a $10,000 project or $100,000 project or whatever. That if there's always, if you on the lookout for RFPs, request for proposals for some municipality has some kind of public art project they want to do. Now, it's not always a good deal. I saw one recently that they were looking for a mural, and by the time I figured the square footage that they were looking for and the budget that they had, it came to $3 a square foot. You couldn't paint a building a solid color for $3 a square foot, let alone a mural. And then their time frame to get it done was absolutely ridiculous. And they, basically the way it was worded was, once they assign, you get a contract with them, then they have 30 days to cut you the initial check, but they expected the work to be completed within 60 days of signing the contract, which means they're going to let you have basically 30 days to get this project done. If it was even that, it might have been 2 weeks to get this project done, and expect you to do it at a rate of $3 a square foot. So you got to be really careful when you look at these things and say, is this in my best interest to even apply for this thing? Because applying for these things,
Right.
filling out proposals, is a time-consuming process. So, all right, so there's RFPs out there. Even better than an RFP is an RFQ, request for qualifications, because then that way you're not doing free work. If you're doing a proposal, right, you're working for free. You are submitting design work. You're devoting design time, brain time, idea time to something that you don't know if you're going to get or not. So that's an issue. So request for qualifications is better, because then you just say, okay, here's what I've done. I'd like to be considered.
You're basically giving them your resume, and I guess
yeah. So
for art, it would be maybe some portfolio samples
So
or something.
RFQs are a lot better than
Okay.
RFPs.
Huh.
But a well-designed RFP, and so in the town of Ashland, right? So we have this arts and cultural district from 2012. It's 7 years in. This is the first year there's been actually any money put into the budget, the town budget for public art. That's why I've been advocating for this like every year. So this year they actually put some money. It's not much, but it's a little bit of money. But so I'm always letting the town council members and the town manager know when I see a good RFP, I'll share it with them. Or when I see a bad one, right? I'll share it with them and say, look, the structure of this RFP is good, but here's the issues I have with it. So when you guys get to the point that you're writing them up, here's some things to take into account. So here's how, in my mind, an ideal RFP would work. You've got a budget. Let's say it's $100,000 for a public art project. All right.
Okay.
And you want it to be, let's say it's going to be a sculpture of some sort. And so what you do is you say, hey, on the corner of this street and this street, we have this little plaza area, and we're looking for proposals for a public art project. And our budget is, let's say it's $60,000, because this is actually realistic. Okay, our budget, because that's what the artist is going to get, $60,000, because you're going to have to put in a foundation. You may have to have a crane company come and install it. So even though you have $100,000 in your municipal budget for this project, all of that's not going to go to the artist, right?
Right. Yeah, there's gonna be some third parties that have to put
You
some
got to
work in
hold
as
back.
well.
Exactly. There may be some landscaping that's done around it, whatever it happens to be. So you got to hold that back, right? Then the thing is that, okay, so we want you to submit proposals. Now, if I am going to submit a proposal for a $100,000 project, how much work do I want to put into that, knowing that I probably am not going to get it, right? I mean, it's like winning the lottery, actually getting the project. So, in business, this is it's called opportunity cost. When you're devoting time into something that you could be doing something else, right? I could be out there making money, but here I am putting a proposal together in the hope that I make some money.
Right.
But if I don't get it, that's opportunity loss. So there's opportunity cost there. How much work do I want to put into a $100,000 project? Now, architects make models all the time and do proposals on their own dime for projects, but those projects are generally multi-million-dollar projects, right? And it's like, well, it's worth it for me to put together a $10,000 proposal, because if I get it, I get a $5 million or $50 million project, whatever it happens to be, right? So that $100,000 is 10%. Certainly seems like way too much, right? I'm not going to pay a 10% tax on something that I don't even know if I'm going to get or not, right? So
yeah, that's true.
if you look at it as a tax, right? So let's say it's 1%. So I'm willing to do a 1% effort on this in proportion to the payoff. Well, the payoff's really only $60,000. So I'm willing to put in $600 worth of work to put my proposal together. All right. And for me, that might be working for 3 days on it. All right. I'm willing to sit down for 3 days and really think about this. I got to go look at the site. I've got to, not only, and I have to put my portfolio together in a presentation way that they want, and then I have to come up with some executable design. So I have to do some cost estimates on this. I may need to reach out to some people and say, hey, what would it cost to do this or that? Because I haven't done experience with that before, right? So it's $600 worth of work. That's a throwaway if I don't get it. All right.
Right.
If I do get considered, let's say the next round is semifinalists. All right. And then the next round, I actually have to build a maquette. As I say, a sculpture. I'm going to build a scale model of this thing in a way that is finished enough and presentable enough that we can have, accessible to the public and say, look, here's our 3 semifinalists. These are the 3 designs, right? So what is the value of that stage of the project? That might be $2,000 worth of work.
Yeah, just to put together that model.
So from the municipality standpoint, what they should do is say, we are going to pick 3 semifinalists, and each one of them will be awarded $2,000 to create, a maquette of their design.
Right. Something just for being asked to
Correct.
do
So
it.
that's $6,000 right there. So that $6,000 comes off the 100,000. You see what I'm saying? So municipal budget for the project's
Right.
$100,000, but we got to put 6 grand aside just for this,
And there goes 6%. There goes 6% of the
just for the
budget right there.
semifinal, just for the semifinalists. Exactly.
Right. The project hadn't even started.
Right, absolutely. So what I'm getting at is like a huge part of what I see as my role and my responsibility is education. Ashland is such a small town that if I tomorrow wanted to go in and have a face to face meeting with the town manager, as long as he had a time slot open, he would see me. He would see anybody in this town.
Mhm.
That's not just me. Anybody who, said, if you walked into town hall and said, "Hey, is Josh available?" If he is, you can sit down and have a conversation with him, which is one of the things I love about the town of Ashland. It's like small enough you can actually have an influence on things. Okay.
Right.
So what I'm trying to do is educate them to, all right, we're putting some money into the public art budget. There's probably going to be some more money next year. We're going to start the process of commissioning public art. It's not really a matter of whether I get a project or not. I would love to get a project, right? But I also have to be careful. If I'm too involved in the process, I could disqualify myself. So
Right. Because at
I
that
want to
point, it's
guide them, right? But I want to guide them into creating good practice.
right. That's definitely some tricky waters, and I imagine somebody who doesn't have the experience, like a younger person, is gonna have a they're gonna have a seriously difficult time trying to get the ball rolling on this kind of thing, which goes right back to the
It's
persistence
seven
thing you were
years,
talking
man. It's
about
been
before.
7 years since they created this arts and culture district, and I have been. Um, there have been times where I've wanted to give up. In fact, if you look at the Ashland Arts Alliance Facebook page group, if you look at my
Mhm.
message at the top of that group, it's one of almost despair, where I'm saying, look, I just can't do this anymore without being compensated for it. I put so much time and energy into trying to make things happen that I'm focusing on my own stuff. People know where to find me. I'm more than happy to engage in conversations, but I'm not pushing this freight train anymore by myself.
Well, hopefully, I know Ashland, they're doing I mean, well, from the outside perspective, it seems like they do a lot to kind of for such a small municipality, they promote themselves really well between what with like breweries that, people are, moving into the area and then the arts district thing. It seems like something they're serious about. So hopefully you can breathe some new life into it and they can, get this
Well,
project done.
it's interesting because the district was created in 2012, and if you look at the strategic plan, all the words are there, all the ideas are there. Okay, it's just a matter of like having follow through. Um, for instance, when I opened my studio behind the curtain, that's my business in Ashland. So I refer to it as a
Mhm.
visual and performing arts studio because I do a lot of different things. Um, but when I went to open it in 2014, um, they asked me. There was a empty warehouse space right in downtown, right across the street from town hall, and they asked me what kind of work I would be doing. I said, well, I do sculpture and design build sets, and I do some carpentry, and I do sculpting and mold making and casting. And their response was, well, that's manufacturing. You need to do that in the industrial park. And I said, look, you guys created an arts and cultural district in 2012. It says here, I have to like print out their own ordinances and things like that. And said, look, it says right here
Right.
that the town wants in the arts and culture district art galleries and art studios. I said, you realize a studio is a place where an artist makes their art. It's the only thing that they had in the town ordinance was under their definitions, they had manufacturing, which was taking raw materials and making a finished product. In order to do that, in order to have a business that was categorized as manufacturing, you had to be in the industrial park. I was like, well, that's also the process of making art. And as it turns out, they changed the zoning ordinance. And I wrote the definition for artist studio that is now in the town code. So I opened the first official artist studio in the town of Ashland under a definition that I wrote.
I know with municipalities and navigating through the politics, especially when you're doing public art
Hmm.
projects, it's it seems like a real, maybe like a real headache, but having to sort of fight to get them to do the thing they asked to do, uh seems like it would be incredibly frustrating dealing with that. And I mean, I don't know what they expect in terms of art studios. I guess they just wanted a bunch of quiet painters
Well, I mean,
to
well,
to show up.
here's the deal, and part of this is sort of a I don't know, it's not malicious, but it is a certain lack of follow through. Okay, so the reason that we have an arts and cultural district is because in 2012, the National Governors Association, I can send you a link to this, but they released a study called New Engines of Growth: Five Roles for Arts, Culture, and Design. And the whole idea is that the arts are an economic stimulator. Okay. So,
Yeah, actually, I heard what was his name? Neil deGrasse Tyson was talking about that. Instead of calling them the STEM fields, they're calling it the
Steve,
STEAM
exactly. They're adding
fields
the A
now.
in there. Exactly.
Yeah.
What happened as a result of this study that was released, states like Virginia encouraged municipalities like Richmond, like Ashland, to create arts and cultural districts because they are a economic driver. Okay, so the town of
Yeah.
Ashland did that. They were like, okay, we declare an arts and culture district in the downtown area, and signed a piece of paper. Then people like me
And
come along and actually
yeah.
try to maneuver within it. And what didn't happen is that nobody sat there and looked at the town code and says, does our code support what we're trying to do or impede it? Right? Because one, they don't know. That's not their, they're not artists. They don't know. They would have had to bring in a consultant or something, right? And they've got other fish to
Right.
fry. They said, oh, the state says we should do this. Let's do this. Town council votes on it. They sign a piece of paper. They have an ordinance. Okay. But then somebody like me comes along and says, okay, cool. You have an arts and culture business. I want to open an art studio. And they're like, yeah, I can't do that. So
Yeah. Yeah, they got no idea what they're getting
So then
themselves
I'm like,
into.
well, yeah, but this says you guys want this. And they were like, oh, yeah, you're right. You want to write a definition for artist studio? And it got included in the in town code.
Well, it sounds like, I mean, at least you've been successful so far, so it sounds like you've at least made some
Oh,
progress
I've
and
made a lot of
hopefully.
progress. I'm not gonna lie. I've
Yeah.
made a lot of progress. But where I want to be, where I feel like things should be, is still a huge gap. And I am always pushing and promoting and trying to get. Here's another funny one for you. This is a real quirk, okay? But in the arts and cultural district, there is a category of business called arts and cultural organization, and there's a it's more like definitions of what it can't be than what it can be. But in the plan, it says, well, this doesn't apply to restaurants or hair salons or, but basically, if you have a creative business, doesn't apply to graphic designers, But if you're an artist that doesn't fit into one of these other more mainstream categories, then you qualify
Mhm.
to apply for an arts and cultural designation organization. So behind the
Hmm.
curtain, my business is an arts and cultural organization within the arts and cultural district of the town of Ashland. Now, there are certain incentives because the idea is we want artists, so we're going to create incentives for you. So if you fit this category, if you apply for this you know special category, then you get certain benefits. Well, those benefits are they amount to about $200 in benefits. I mean, you don't have to pay your B poll taxes, which comes to about $30 a year. Like for the first 3 years, you don't have to pay the fee for a permit for a sign. Now, there's some like really really basic things that are like, okay, that's fine. But here's the catch: is that when there's organizations like Culture Works, which is a freaking amazing organization. So don't get me wrong here. Okay. So they were like the biggest arts funding organization for the greater Richmond area. But all of their grant money that is available to organizations, um, for instance, I was started 2 years ago, producing the Fourth Fridays and Summer Breeze free concert series in Ashland. So I produced 36
Okay.
free concerts over the last 2 years. Okay. So there is some funding available through Culture Works for organizations that are doing like free programming to the public, right? The catch
Right.
is that funding is only available to nonprofit organizations.
That's awfully tricky.
So, in order to apply for the grant, you have to partner with a nonprofit organization. And my point is, it's sort of like the artist studio uh, oversight, right? What I'm saying is,
Mm-hmm.
and I've actually contacted both Culture Works and the Virginia Commission for the Arts about this. And my position is this: that in the year 2012, the state of Virginia basically created a new type of business, a for-profit arts business called an arts and cultural organization. And the point was for municipalities to create districts to draw these businesses in. Now, I took the
Right.
bait. I opened my business in Ashland in 2014. And the challenge is that there
Mm-hmm.
is no funding available to me because I'm not a nonprofit.
Interesting. Like a catch-22, basically.
Well, yeah. So to me, it's really a matter of it's an oversight. Nobody, to my knowledge, I'm not saying people haven't experienced this already, but to my knowledge, I haven't come across anybody else talking about this. And what I'm saying is that these funding organizations, and it may start on a national level, because if the National Endowment for the Arts gives funding to the Virginia Commission for the Arts, and they give funding to Culture Works, and from the top on down, they say that this funding is only available to nonprofit organizations, then everybody's hands are tied. And so all the money is coming with handcuffs on it. So at some point, there needs to be a national conversation that, hey, about almost a decade ago, we created a new kind of business in this country in the arts that we aren't funding.
Hmm. That's pretty interesting. That does make me wonder what that, like I said, what that's gonna look like moving forward as far as the landscape of artists, and especially when you're talking about traditional things like sculpture and painting, as opposed to as opposed to what you see now. A lot of art is mostly associated with like advertising and marketing. So it does
Well,
make
there's
you
that. There's that. But let's just say, let's take sculpture, okay? And
mhm.
let's say a town like Ashland or like Richmond has some public art money and they want some sculpture, okay? So you issue an RFP and artists respond. Now, generally speaking, you rate the proposals on a point basis, right?
Mhm.
You rate them based on their qualifications and the work they've done in the past. Are they capable of doing a project like this, right?
Mhm.
You rate it, I mean, you rate it, sure, on the concept. Oh, this is a really cool idea. You rate it on the level of work that they do, right? So you could get a sculpture from somebody who maybe isn't that great of a sculptor, but the idea is so good that you can say, all right, we'll give them some points for concept and whatever, you know. And so you could also rate it on a locality. Like, let's say you say, all right, this is open nationally to artists, but if you're a Virginia artist, you get an extra point, right? If you're a
Okay.
Hanover County artist, in the case of Ashland, if you're a Hanover County artist, you get an extra point. If you're an actual Ashland business or resident, you get an extra point. But I would go further to say if you are an artist in our arts and cultural district, you get extra points for that. You know what I'm saying? So there's all sorts of ways to leverage,
I
make this
see.
advantageous without having to necessarily throw money at
Exclude.
it.
Yeah, you don't have to exclude, like, other groups, but then also you don't have
But
to pour a bunch of money into it.
make it a benefit. Find ways to make it a benefit, right?
Interesting.
So,
That's a pretty creative way of tackling that.
well, yeah, yeah. So that's one way. And like for me, okay, fine. So you have a public art commission. So I have a better chance to get this commission because I'm an Ashland Arts and Cultural Organization. Okay, that's cool. But there's things that I do and have done in the town that I have not gotten compensated for. That they actually did give me some funding. So I'm not going to say that they actually funded the stage and trailer equipment that I have, and then they gave me some funding one year for my concerts. But basically, I'm producing 36 free concerts. There's a couple of years in a row where I decorated the downtown in October. The lampposts and telephone poles, I wrapped them in corn stalks with hay bales because I've done that kind of thing in King's Dominion and Busch Gardens. Like huge. That's why I kept telling them, like, look, I've done an entire theme park's worth of decor. I can decorate this downtown.
Yeah.
So I've done it a couple of times just to show what I've done, but I haven't been able to get any funding for doing that. And it's one thing if the town doesn't want to put money in the budget for that, but I can't even apply for a grant to do that because I'm not a nonprofit organization.
It sounds a little bit complex, but it also sounds like probably somebody who has the know-how like yourself would be the sort of person to maybe hopefully in the future help like get that tackled politically so that it gets the funding that it needs.
I think so. Even in Ashland, we have a Wawa that just opened up last year. Okay,
Yeah.
and my business, my wife and I, our business was in one of the buildings that got bulldozed to make way for the Wawa. So we had to move our studio.
Oh, wow.
And so I'm doing these free concerts, and I find out because I was like looking to see if like maybe Wawa could be a sponsor. Um, so I found out that they actually do have a fund for community events, very much like the stuff that I was doing. But
Huh.
guess what? It's only available to what?
More
Nonprofit
nonprofits.
organizations.
Interesting. Well,
So everybody has this nonprofit mentality, and I'm not bashing nonprofits per se, but especially in the arts, we got to get out of this headset
yeah,
that the arts are by default nonprofit.
it makes the threshold for entry very difficult if you're a young person or if you're not already an established business person or artist. It makes it incredibly difficult to enter that arena by putting this arbitrary declaration on there. Oh, you have to be a nonprofit. Well, to successfully operate a nonprofit, you're going to have to, your fundraising abilities and your capabilities are going to have to be
Yeah, when you're
far
saying,
beyond an
oh,
entry level
right,
person.
and you're saying all I want to do is create a public experience. I want to do something
Yeah,
that
make a mark.
is,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. It's not necessarily that I want a grant to make a sculpture or do a painting. I want to create it. I want to do performance art. I want to create an experience that I want to decorate a public space, whatever that happens to be. And as an individual artist, there are grants available, but not as so for your own art. Like there are grants available um, for artists and for creating, like, for instance, when I was doing my concerts, I went to culture works and I was talking to them about the way the grant was worded, and if I were the musician performing the music, I could apply for the grant because I was the organization producing the events and hiring other bands, I didn't qualify to for the grant.
That's incredibly ironic to say the very least about it.
Yeah, yeah. So, like I said, there's this national mentality about nonprofits, and it's almost like the waterworks. The tears start flowing, or expected to, every time somebody says, "Well, I'm a nonprofit," and like everybody's supposed to just bend over. And then there's this whole other tangential conversation here, and that nonprofit organizations are always approaching artists about donating their art to the nonprofit. And I would argue that it's the artist that's more in need of support than the nonprofit. Why isn't the nonprofit figuring out how can we support the artist? So one way to do this is let's say you're having an auction. We're going to raise money. We're doing a fundraiser. We're going to auction some stuff off.
Mm-hmm.
Well, a lot of times when you have these artists donate art and they have these silent auctions, a lot of times you'd be lucky if these things get auctioned off, even for the cost of materials that's in the piece, let alone
At a
the time the
profit.
artist actually put into there. Okay,
Right.
so especially if it's sculpture, but even painting, it's like canvas and framing and paint and stuff, and then if it gets auctioned off for even the value of that, you might be lucky. So here, the artist is actually damaging their own brand because their work is selling for, cut rate way below what they could ever sell it for and make a buck, right?
Right.
And how much time did the artist lose? This ain't like giving away free pizzas, okay? It's like everything that an artist makes is research and development and one of a kind. So, and it's an idea lost. It's an idea sold. Okay, now I can't reproduce that and sell it because I've already sold it,
Done it. Right.
done it, right? So, why not give the artist a majority chunk of the proceeds from that sale, like you would with a gallery? Let's say the gallery takes 30% for a piece of art. And
Right.
why does the nonprofit organization just take 30% of the piece of art and let the artist have the rest and let the artist put a price on it to say, well, this I'm not going to sell it unless I get at least whatever it is,
Right. If
$1,000 for the piece,
Yeah, if
right?
you've got
And it,
paintings floating around selling for $500, nobody's gonna pay 1,500 or 2,000 for one of your
right,
other pieces.
yeah. And
Yeah.
if it doesn't sell, I get it back. Okay, but
Mhm.
this way, the organization isn't out anything less. They're not paying for this thing out of pocket. I've actually approached nonprofit organizations about this with the response of, "Well, we can't afford to do that." I'm like, well, what part of this doesn't make sense? What makes you think the artist can afford to do that? And how can you not afford to do this? It's not costing you anything. It's if it sells, you make money. If it doesn't, you don't. In what part of this equation is it costing you anything?
Right, the part that cost the money might have been putting on the event to begin with, but,
Which you're already
beyond
doing,
that.
right?
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
So I have like I'm fighting a many fronted battle here. It's like everywhere I turn, I see things in the arts that are I see them as how they should be, as opposed to how they are, and some of the things are approachable, some aren't. I at least start conversations. Like if I see a public post about somebody asking for artists to donate their art, I will respond and I will try to educate them and tell them why what they're doing is bad for the artists and a better way that they could do it. And maybe for some of these people, this will actually sink in. Maybe the next time they design an event, it'll be
They'll
better.
hopefully bear some of that thought in mind.
Yeah, because my goal is to make it better for everybody. You know?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think we covered a lot of really great stuff today as far as, well, as far, in a perfect world, how these art events should hopefully be organized in the future. And then, some, I mean, really interesting stuff as far as like the materials planning and the actual cost that goes into these things. Because I hear that, especially my dad is the biggest art critic for somebody who doesn't know anything about art, but he's like, how did this guy get paid $500,000 to paint four yellow canvases? And it's like, well, yeah. So on the one hand, I see what you mean. On the other hand, there's definitely a lot that goes into the stuff. So I think that
Well,
it's
not
pretty
not only that, but he spent a career building a brand, right?
exactly,
So
yeah,
now,
that too.
so you're not getting a yellow canvas; you're getting a yellow canvas with his name on it.
Exactly,
It's like
exactly.
why does a baseball with somebody's signature on it? Why is that so much more
Right.
valuable, right? Why is a
Eh,
ball that was the home run ball from the World Series? Why is that worth more?
Yeah,
Just because a
exactly, and
ball.
especially the intrinsic value people place on things, which is actually it's funny you bring that up, that where it lines up between like the entertainment culture in general and then specifically the art world itself. But no, I think that this was a really valuable conversation. I hope to have you back on the show again in the future.
I'd love to. Love to.
Absolutely, and I'll make sure check below. All the listeners check below for all the links, so you can find Arthur's page, and then you can find his studio in Ashland behind the curtain to contact about any events you might be planning, or possibly any work.
Yep, yep. So the website is behindthecurtainstudio.com, and on Facebook, I'm Behind the Curtain Studio.
Absolutely. All right. Well, Arthur, I really appreciate your time today, man. Thank you very much.
Sure thing.
And to everyone else, as always, thanks for listening.
All right.